Thanks, first of all, for the invitation to be here. I'm very happy to participate in this program. And I hope I can convey something that will give you more hope. I had to write something about hope recently, and I suddenly realized when I did so that hope has a different perspective for different people, undoubtedly. And those of us who are not really suffering can't really speak of hope. But I think it's important to recognize at the same time that South Africa in general, many people at the moment, at least where I move around, and I would like to counter that argument. I would like to see how we can actually change it around, because we've been in this position before. It's not the first time, and I'll come to that. So I think the reason why we are feeling a little bit desperate as we are speaking today is the fact that South Africa indeed lost about 20% of its wealth in the 4 or 5 years preceding 2018, or the end of 2017. I think if you calculate all the losses that amounted as a result of the fact of bad management of the state assets, the bad management and looting of public enterprises and private assets, I don't have to remind you of Steinhoff, and the reckless appointment of ministers of finance and firing of them. I think we can say very clearly where the loss of wealth come from, those three areas combined, of which was probably the most devastating, the firing of Nhlanhla Nene at the beginning of December 2015. You will recall that, when he was replaced with a man that was totally unknown by everybody, that was Des van Rooyen. The impact of all those losses amounted to this loss of wealth. And if we talk about 20% across the spectrum, it means rich and poor have suffered as a result of that. So we have to rebuild the economy. We have to regain the losses. And we have to find a way to get hope back into the minds of South Africans at large. Now, this reminds me to some extent of where we found ourselves at the early 1990s. Some of you were around at that stage will recall. As a result of apartheid and the sanctions and the punitive measures against South Africa, by the end of the 1980s, we suffered hugely. We had a dead standstill position, and the country could just not survive anymore. It was a desperate situation, which is comparable to what we are experiencing today, or at least during the last period of time. And it took us a period of time to get out of that, at least 5 years. Even after Mandela took over as president of the new democracy, it took another period of time. But then we had a blossoming time, so to speak, with the most fortunate of wealth growth of the economy that we ever had, probably, up to 5% growth, late 1990s, early 2000s. So I think it can be done again. The problem is we find ourselves today in this dip as a result of what happened in the previous 5 years. And to get out of this will take time. I think the turning point has arrived. My understanding is that the results for the second quarter is much better than the first quarter. So there are positive signs. But the real experience of people on the ground, across the spectrum, I think will take a bit of time to come through, probably 3 to 5 years. Going back to the early 1990s, just one reminder, and that is that in that period we created the democracy, but also the best democracy, I think, that we can fairly say on earth, because we established a constitutional framework that really gave us hope. And we still benefit from that constitutional democracy. We benefit not only from the Constitution, but also the institutions that were created. And that is probably what kept us together during the bad times of the previous era. I'm talking about the period leading up to last year. There was one mistake, however, that we made. And I have to point this out because I think it is important to just for a moment reflect on that. And that is the fact that at the end of the planning for the new democracy, in other words, once we have accepted the new constitution as the way forward, we should have carried on with something about planning also the socio-economic transformation of the country. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. And maybe it was a mistake of us. We were sitting around the table at that stage, and when we had the constitution done, we shook hands and said, job done, we can get on with something else. And unfortunately, I think that was a mistake. Right then, we were in the position to actually carry on with the planning for the immediate future in terms of transformation. By not doing so, we find ourselves now 25 years later in a situation, unfortunately, where the transformation is not nearly coming to an end. And it's not in sight even, the completion of the transformation. I can recall that at the time of the transition from apartheid to democracy, I said to myself, it will probably take us 15 years. But that was just a thumb suck. It's now 25 years later, and it's still not in sight, the end of the transformation. And that is part of the frustration that people experience today. But talk of a kind of an economic codessa or something like that is floating around many times, and sometimes by many important people. Personally, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we must just do what is practically possible and get the job done. And one of the things that we started to look at was how can private sector and public sector combine forces in a much better way than what was experienced in the last period of time. I think it's fair to say that during the period of the last 10 years up to 2017, there was very little interaction, if any, between private sector and the state. As a result of which, people went in separate ways, and there was no combined effort to rebuild the country. When President Ramaphosa last year, February, in his first State of the Nation address, made an appeal to South Africans through the Tumamina call, some from business, some from private sector started to react and said, okay, so what is it that we can do? And this is the story or the message that I would like to leave with you. One such person from private sector was Johan van Zyl from Toyota. And I'm not promoting Toyota when I say that. It's just there's another Johan van Zyl also, so I have to mention the fact where this Johan van Zyl is coming from. He is presently, as you might know, the head of Toyota Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And he sits in Brussels. But he's a South African, and he's coming back once his job is fulfilled in Brussels. So when he read the speech of President Ramaphosa in February last year, he started to think about what the response from private sector can be. Soon after, I was incidentally in Brussels, and we had a conversation about this. And Johan drafted, and I'm sharing this little bit of unnecessary detail, but it left an impression on me, so maybe it will be the same with you. So Johan drafted a one-page diagram of what he said could happen in South Africa if private sector responds in the right way to this call by the president. But the important thing is he said the Japanese, that is where he learned it from, because he serves on the main board of Toyota Japan. He said the Japanese doesn't use concept notes and long proposals when they want something done. They do it on one page, because the departure point is if you can't do it on one page, then it's not worth reading. So he did it on one page, and I could even understand what he was trying to get to. I came back, I started to have a conversation with some local private sector leaders. And once Johan was back here for a visit, we got a small group together and we started this. That was around about April last year. But now it was a question of how to get this into the mind of government. If private sector responds this way, we have to make it also the belief of government. The whole concept is based on the following, and that is to say, if we join forces between private sector and government, public sector and private sector, then we can actually work towards the same aims and goals for the sake of the country and get the economy growing. So Johan's point of view was to say, let's get different sectors of the economy to commit each towards certain growth targets for the next 5 years, including job creation and transformation. And then ask government to remove the inhibitors that would prevent that growth from happening. And that is the simple theory behind this model. In the end, we succeeded in getting to President Ramaphosa and presenting him the plan. That was right now a year ago in August last year. We took 3 sectors to make the point. The one was the automotive sector, because that is where Johan is coming from. The other is agriculture, for a very obvious reason, and that is agriculture has the potential to produce the highest growth rate of all sectors in South Africa. And the third one was tourism, where we also have the potential of growing. And we identified in each of those the inhibitors that would prevent this growth. By means of example, those 3 sectors. President said, yes, go ahead, work with the minister and the presidency, who was in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the time, and we started off this project. And within a few months, we had no less than 20 sectors combining their effort. The end result is that the president could, well, not the end result, but the intermediate result was that the president could announce in June, in the State of the Nation after the elections, he could announce that private sector has committed itself to 840 billion of new investments, internally, locally, South African investments, 840 billion over the next 5 years, resulting in 155,000 jobs and coming from more than 20 sectors of the economy. So this is already happening. It's of course not the end target, but it is already in motion. What our function is, and I'm not a business person myself. I should have retired a long time ago. Cesar was saying he's 62, I'm 72. And I'm struggling to get myself into the mindset of retirement. And so I've given up on that. I decided I will just carry on as long as I feel I can get up in the morning. So the function that we're fulfilling, and when I say we, that means this little outfit that I belong to, which is in Transformation Initiative, is to facilitate between government and private sector. The project is called Public-Private Growth Initiative. And we have brought all these sectors together. We help them to focus on what they need to do. Let me give you one example. When we started to reach out to different sectors, by September, October last year, we spoke to the ICT sector and said to them, will you like to join this effort? And they were not organized or coordinated at all. Nothing. There are at least 11, 12 major ICT companies in South Africa, but they didn't work together. So for the first time, when we suggested this to them, they started to form a coordinated structure. Now they are working beautifully together. But what is more important, they engage together with the Department of Telecommunications. And they are just the happiest people at the moment because they say for the first time they get a response from the government in the way that they would expect. The same can be said of some other sectors too. The one thing that I still don't understand, just by means of example, is, for instance, in the tourism, on the tourism side, the problems that we have with regard to visas. People are struggling from all over to come to South Africa if they wish, but they can't get easy access to visa applications and visa documents. You know, I do some work elsewhere. Recently, I went to Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan. And another place I'm going to frequently is Myanmar in the east. Every time I apply for a visa, it takes me 10 minutes to get an e-visa. It's as simple as that. Payment included, done. You have it there to prove. To come to South Africa is almost impossible from some countries. And we have to change this as quickly as we can. 2 days ago, and I don't want to create the impression that we can turn the world, but 2 days ago we had a meeting with the President, Johan and I, to give him feedback on the progress that we're making, but also on the need to remove those inhibitors that prevent us from growing. And that all government departments must work towards achieving that goal. The President agrees, and I think I can say that Johan and I walked out of that meeting very hopeful. And I convey this to you because I think it's important that we lift our own emotions. My friends are saying to me, is the President not suffering because of all the media reports that's around? And we all know what appears in the media. I had no impression that he's suffering. He was actually, for 1.5 hours during that meeting, totally committed to one thing, and that is, what plans can we make jointly to take the country forward? And that is the positive message that I would like to leave with you. And it's not only him. The Minister of Cooperative Governance, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And I mention her by name because people are still questioning as a result of what happened 2 years ago in the Battle of Nasrec. She was the one that actually inspired this project to come about because she was the minister in the presidency responsible for planning, monitoring, and evaluation up to the time of the election. So for a whole year, we worked very, very closely with her in establishing this project. Now she is so sold on this project that she wants us to do the same for her in the Department of Cooperative Governance, which is local government. In fact, she has asked us to specifically assist with regard to local municipalities in the rural areas who are all suffering. When I said to her 3 weeks ago in the meeting, Minister, I'm worried, I'm concerned about the level of service delivery by our local municipalities, particularly in the rural areas. Her response was, that's an understatement. But here suddenly she's coming forward and saying, how can you help me? On the basis of this public-private growth initiative, how can you help me to take this forward? And you know what is the beauty? We have farming communities all around the country. There's not a single little town in South Africa that hasn't got a boerevereniging. And we can combine forces. If there's a willingness on the side of government to accept this, we can make a change. Now, you're sitting somebody in the audience that is going to create that opportunity